that you heard. So smoke 'em if you got 'em. Boys and girls, say goodbye to the past. Now raise up your glass and revel while it lasts. It's the end of the world.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to Theology in the Dirt. We want to practice our theology in the public square of our homes, our city, and our world. We record Theology in the Dirt from Global Impact Restoration Rome. We work to address the foster care and adoption crisis in Northwest Georgia, the state of Georgia, the Southeast, and the world as we practice our theology in the public square. You can check out Restoration Rome by going to restorationrome.org. You can also get sermon notes and links to the rest of our podcast at theologyinthedirt.com. My name is Mitchell Jolly.
And I'm Chris Hayes.
And you know what? We have some news.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story. And I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen. Cannonball!
Yeah, everybody. And if you don't know where that's from, you repent and go watch that movie. It's one of the greatest news intros of all time.
That's right. Stay classy.
Stay classy, Rome, Georgia. Well, in news today, brought to you by the Dispatch, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced an agreement on a $1.59 trillion top-line spending number for fiscal year 2024, including $886.3 billion in defense spending and $704 billion in non-defense spending. The agreement also appeared to include the $69 billion side deal for an additional non-defense spending negotiated between President Joe Biden and former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy last spring that would bring the total spending to $1.66 trillion, something the hardline House Freedom Caucus labeled a total failure last night. Lawmakers still have to pass all 12 spending bills now that a top-line number has been reached, and the government is set to shut down partially on January 19th and fully on February 2nd without approval of the appropriations bills or another continuing resolution. The U.S. Supreme Court agreed on Friday to review the Colorado Supreme Court's ruling barring former President Donald Trump from the state's primary ballot for allegedly violating the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment. Oral arguments in the case are set for February the 8th. Massachusetts became the latest state to challenge Trump's eligibility for the ballot. And as a group of voters organized by Free Speech for People, an advocacy organization backing challenges in several states, filed an objection with the Massachusetts Secretary of State's office. Next, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered a temporary grounding of 171 Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft. Did y'all see this? This was wild. After a piece of the fuselage ripped off an Alaskan Airlines jet en route to Ontario from California. It was leaving Portland at the time. The incident occurred approximately 10 to 15 minutes into the flight. They were at 16,000 feet, and there's this huge hole in the side of the fuselage. And thankfully, it didn't rip anybody out. It took some things out of the plane with it, and you can see like stuff passing by as this plane is flying and oxygen masks are down. It's crazy. And so it resulted in the rapid decompression of the cabin and forcing the pilots to execute an emergency landing. No passengers were seated in the row where the blowout happened. Isn't that wild? It's crazy. And no one on board sustained any serious injuries. Saturday marked the third anniversary of January 6th Capitol attack, and federal authorities are still making arrests and charging individuals for their roles in the assault. Attorney General Merrick Garland said Friday that the Justice Department has so far charged more than 1,250 people in connection with the riot. Excuse me. Convicting more than 890. The Federal Bureau of Investigation arrested 3 fugitives on Saturday who were on the run from law enforcement and accused of participating in the attack. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled on Friday that people who entered the Capitol on January 6th can be found guilty of disorderly or disruptive conduct, even if they didn't engage in violence or vandalism. Judge Karen Henderson argued, in her opinion, that in determining whether an act is disorderly, the act cannot be divorced from the circumstances in which it takes place. And that's my news. Here's what you got.
All right. Hundreds of pages of documents from the Jeffrey Epstein trial have been unsealed in the past week or so, naming dozens of big-name celebrities, politicians, including former and current presidents, royal family figures, rich businessmen and women, and much more. Now, being named doesn't mean those people are guilty, but as more information and names get leaked, it does beg to wonder how much is true and how much is, fabricated. It's one of those situations that could ruin the lives of countless people, But for those who are participating in illegal activities, particularly those of sex trafficking and abuse, let's just hope and pray the truth actually does come out and doesn't get tucked away to protect the rich and powerful, which is usually what happens. Yeah. Also, according to the CDC, there were almost 35,000 COVID hospitalizations across the country for the week ending December 30th, a 20.4% increase over the prior week. Because of this, numerous hospitals and medical facilities across the country are imposing mask mandates once again. This highly contagious new variant of COVID called JN1 is the primary cause. And also confirmed flu cases were up almost 18% during the final week of the year as well. So stay healthy, everybody. That's it for our headlines for today. So let's remind folks about our sponsor, Magic Mind. So now TID listeners, don't forget about Magic Mind. With key ingredients like matcha and cordyceps mushrooms and a host of other amazing ingredients that boost brain function. You'll be super pleased with Magic Mind. Now, we just started 2024. It's our first episode of the new year, and we want to hit the ground running and make 2024 another solid year. We want to make sure that we are at our best with brain health. So if you'd like to try an all-natural, gluten-free, sugar-free, keto, vegan, and paleo-friendly amazing help to increase your focus and energy and contributes to your brain health, you got to give Magic Mind a try. We've both been using Magic Mind for a while now. We think you'd enjoy it as well. It's a great booster, and at this time of the day or any time of the day that you're listening, there's a prolonged benefits, including just increase in energy, helps us focus longer throughout the day, and just basically makes you feel better. You can get it at magicmind.com/theologyinthedirt with our special code TID20. You can also get up to 56% off your first subscription or 20% off your one-time purchase. That's promo code TID20 for 56% off. It also works if you're already a subscriber, so you just save on your next subscription payment. And one of the new things, you can also find Magic Mind at all Sprouts Farmers Market stores across the country. If you have a Sprouts nearby, go there and grab some. But we definitely want to recommend it. It has a 100% money-back guarantee, no questions asked. There's no risk to you if you don't like it. They refund it in 3 to 4 hours. And on a side note, I usually don't like these things, but I actually think it tastes pretty good. And so I'm fairly picky, so I think you guys will like the taste of it as well. Once again, magicmind.com/theologyinthedirt. Use our promo code TID20 for up to 56% off your subscription, and the 30-pack is the best value. Give it a try.
All right, guys, it's time to get after it.
3, 2, 1.
Well, it's time to get down in the dirt and wrestle with the topic. So we're starting, this is January the 8th, and so we're just a few days after. So we want to talk about January the 6th, and we talk about 2024 election cycle. But we got to acknowledge there's somebody in the room today. And so who are you? And tell us why. And this is not your first time on Theology in the Dirt.
No. So I am Gabriel Jolly. I'm your oldest son.
You are indeed. Why are you here?
So I'm here. Normally I would be back home in Dahlonega, Georgia, where I live and go to school. But while we were on vacation over Christmas break out west at Zion National Park, I tore my ACL.
You did indeed.
And it went snap, crackle, pop. And I now get to spend an illustrious vacation again.
That's right.
This time in my own home.
You do. That's pretty nice.
I get to be home for a while and spend some time with the family and help out and do stuff to, keep my mind occupied.
That's right. Gabe's a pretty sharp guy. He's well educated, and he loves God, following the Lord. He's a disciple, reads his Bible faithfully, and he's a sharp thinker. And he has great opinions. If you sit around our table when we're all around, there's a lot of loud talking about various topics. We're passionate and we debate a lot of things. It's just kind of what we do. And so Gabe's been on the podcast before. We had an episode way back where we talked about what it's like to be a pastor's son. And so we thought Gabe needs to get out of the house before his surgery, which happens January 16th. Yeah. And Chris says, God, we got a picture of you and Brittany babysitting Gabe and John Mark when they were 4 and 2.
Yeah, and we've known you longer than that.
Yeah.
I think probably. Yeah. What year were you born?
2001.
So I met you 2003. So you were 2 years old,
yep.
Dragging you guys around the floor.
I think that picture is one of my favorites. You and Brittany have them, and one of them there's a mandolin, and I think you were either playing the mandolin, entertaining them, or something. But what's wild is, for me at this moment, 2 grown men sitting here, one of which babysat this one. Chris babysitting this one when he was 4 with his little brother, John Mark, sitting there. It's absolutely insane. So I think that's pretty wild. So anyway, we're glad to have you, Gabe. We're glad to have you be part of the podcast for a little bit while you recover.
Right.
And so let me kick it off by asking this question, because I clearly my voice is bothering me. I'm not sick. I have whatever's going on in my voice, and it's goopy. So I'm gonna let you guys talk a lot today.
Nice.
I see various things on Twitter when it comes to January 6th, because it was just the 3rd anniversary of January 6th. It's been called everything from an insurrection by some that's deserving of criminal punishment to a protest that maybe got out of hand. I personally have seen video footage, maybe you guys have, of various Capitol Hill police making statements about their role as Antifa plants. And I don't think that's been AI generated. It could be garbage, but it's out there. People see it. And if they haven't seen it, maybe they need to look for it. But it's there because that kind of information is information that also feeds the public. There's also video footage of Capitol Hill police opening doors and showing people around who they let in the facility, who are being prosecuted for walking through the facility. Mm-hmm. There have been people who've been arrested, who maybe should have been arrested, but held in solitary confinement, like the shaman guy. He's weird, the dude with the Loyal Order of Water Buffalo hat on.
Yeah.
Jacob Chansley, I think's his name. He's an interesting cat. But I guess the question is, why are they held in? I mean, I'm not saying the dude should never been arrested. I think he stole a podium. He did some stuff he probably shouldn't have done. But solitary confinement. But Prince Andrew gets to skate for the stuff he's clearly been accused of doing. Like, there seems to be no open investigation of Prince Andrew for abusing girls in Jeffrey Epstein's island. And we can't even get the full list released. So why is the goofy shaman guy in solitary confinement and Prince Andrew walking free? I think those are worthy questions. And I don't see anything wrong with that question. And if that's a wrong question, please somebody correct me. So I guess my question is, what was January the 6th? And what in the world are we supposed to do with that? Because I hear from brothers inside the faith speaking of it as absolute evil, and some people saying, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's been blown out of proportion. And what are we supposed to think?
Well, I think first, like a lot of things that are political in nature, everything is pushed to one extreme or the other.
Right.
I've heard it called everything from domestic terrorism attack to nothing happened. It was all set up and predicated by Democrats to get Republicans in trouble. And I don't think either of those are 100% accurate, but I think that's typically what we find. Right. And when we get to our other topic today, talking about the 2024 election cycle, the same can be true. Like, there's a lot of things that but here, I got some numbers I want to share. And the reason why, because regardless of what you believe about what happened, whether you're on one of those extremes or you're somewhere in the middle, there's a lot of real world implications that have happened. There's a whether it's small or big incident, the results, the ramifications have been big. So let me go through some of these numbers. The U.S. Attorney's Office for D.C. said more than, and you said a couple of these earlier, 1,265 defendants from nearly all 50 states have been charged in connection with January 6th. And we just passed the 3-year mark from when that happened. Over 200 of those have come in the past 6 months. Nearly 452 have been charged with assaulting a police officer and 123 with using a deadly weapon to do so. Another 11 were charged with assaulting members of the media or destroying their equipment. Roughly 71 defendants have been charged with destruction of government property and 56 with theft of government property. Over 332 have been charged with corruptly obstructing, influencing, or impeding an official proceeding or attempting to do so. The vast majority of defendants whose cases have been resolved have pleaded guilty, many of whom faced or will face incarceration at sentencing. Out of the 718 guilty pleas, 213 involved felonies, including 89 for assaulting a police officer, 41 for obstruction, and 4 for seditious conspiracy. Another 171 were found guilty in contested trials, 76 of whom were charged with assaulting an officer. And then roughly 467 defendants have been sentenced to prison terms, some as high as 12 and a half years. So I say all that to say the ramifications are very real for a lot of these people who were either very implicit in what was going on, were a bad, wrong place, wrong time situation, and all the above. And I think the truth is, and going back to the Epstein stuff as well, number one, we just don't know because they're not releasing all, like there's a lot more footage that hasn't been released. I think we can be clear on that, right? There's cameras all over that place. And for us to only have a handful of videos that seem to be very specifically released on with an intent, purposeful intent.
Right.
That's one thing.
100%.
Yeah. So, but I think as a believer, there's absolutely things we should run on taking a side on, but this is not one that we can just run with a side without knowing all the details, right? Yeah. And so there's just so much misleading information that it's hard for me to give a strong opinion on it.
Yeah, like I think one thing's for sure, it's definitely not something that you can just kind of whitewash. I mean, it was not an ideal situation. But also I think as someone who's been to a Trump rally, like I've seen the clientele, and the vibe, and I totally get how something like this could have escalated into that, just because I think the people who would go to a Trump rally and who probably were there, it's very much an attitude of we're here because we feel like the status quo has shifted and we want to change it. We want to shift it back into the right direction. And so I think you can get a pretty clear idea of what happened just listening to what Trump said that day, which was by no means trying to start anything violent. It was just hey, let's make our voices heard. Right? And this is a public building. It's our building, like as the people. And then it definitely got out of hand. Right? I mean, weapons were fired inside the Capitol building. That's no matter what caused it, no matter who the people are, it's a bad situation.
Yeah.
But I think you can also very easily see that it was in some places very orderly because you literally had law enforcement helping people into the building.
Yeah. It's very interesting. All right. So you mentioned you went to a Trump rally. Now, well, if you're from Rome, Georgia, he came to Rome. He flew to
it was crazy.
It was a big deal.
It was really neat. Although I definitely regret it, not because I went to a Trump rally, but because we got in line. Me and some of my friends were like, "Hey, Trump's coming to Rome. Like, why would we not go see this?" And I voted for him. I was like, "Yeah, heck yeah, why not?" So we piled into a car, drove down to Russell Airport, the little regional airport in Floyd County, and I think we got there around 10 a.m. And we stood just in a crowd at the airport 10 a.m. Thankfully, it was like late fall, winter, so it wasn't that hot outside. He did not show up until 10 p.m. We stood on an airport tarmac for 12 hours. It was pretty cool, though, to see, just watch Air Force One fly in.
It's pretty wild.
It was neat, but just I know the attitude of those rallies and just being in that environment, and it is very passionate. I mean, you have people who participate in their local elections, and they understand the world, or they think they understand the world, and they're very passionate about trying to ensure that the presidency is occupied by someone who has their best interest at heart. And when you're in a current political system that is very not concerned with the well-being of its citizens, then I totally understand how that scenario was able to boil over. And I don't think there's any one person to blame.
I think it's interesting. I think you have categories of people. You have people who were there truly because they were concerned and they felt that their system of their government isn't listening to them. I think that's what got Donald Trump elected in the first place, is you had a man who was speaking to the population, a populist nationalistic movement. And they felt like, with the information that was coming out, some people felt like, and many people still feel like, that the election wasn't all on the up and up. And so you had some people ready to truly be violent over it, and some people just wanting to make their voice heard, and it was a mixed bag. And I think this combination, which I find interesting, is a powder keg of ideas. I'm reading this book right now called The Fourth Turning, and if you aren't familiar with it, it's worth checking out. And it's a book that takes a historical perspective on history being cyclical, and seasons of time, periods of time, called a saculum, of 80 to 100 years, and 4 segments of 80 to 100 years that form a winter, spring, summer, and fall period. And what's interesting is they speak about where we currently are is about 10 to 15 years into that last part of a cycle leading into a winter. And historically, in pre-colonial America, the colonies up to this point, each of those have always been predicated on the very mentality we have now as a population that feels it hasn't been heard, severe crisis economically or globally, and they all, by and large, are some massive economic problem or some internal or global problem that usually ends in war. And I think people are feeling that, and so you had this mixed bag of people who feel their government doesn't represent them. You have a mixed bag of people who feel like something was stolen from them, and some people who truly don't like the direction of the country, so they came together. And what's interesting is somehow that mixed bag boiled over into something that turned into gunshots being fired at the Capitol.
Right, and not only did that mixed bag boil over, for whatever reason, that group of people has latched themselves onto Donald Trump. And that's not a coincidence. And I think that's probably because Donald Trump is a businessman, and I think he saw the opportunity that was this group of people. And he said, I could represent that. I could be whatever they want me to be, which I think, because if you pay attention to Donald Trump politically, he's all over the map. He's waffled for like 30, 40 years.
True.
And I think, and just again, as someone who studies history, that's very.
You are a history major, by
yes,
the way.
yes. So like that's very, that's very Napoleonic. Right?
Yeah.
Like I will be to whatever group of people, whatever they want me to be. I just use an opportunist, and I think that he presented to that group of people exactly what they wanted.
Yeah.
And I think the result of January 6th, I don't think you can call that Trump's fault at all. I think it's just you get that many people in that place, and I think if you put them in that environment, I think they're going to be like, you know what, this is my government.
Yeah.
Like my tax dollars built this building. My tax dollars paid for that podium. I'm going to take it.
So how are we supposed to approach January 6th in light of things like the Boston Tea Party? Basically the shot heard around the world. John Adams representing as a colonial. If you've read about John Adams, he represented the British soldiers who were accused of shooting the people gathered to protest. Mm-hmm. Now the story is that those British soldiers were incited to fire, and John Adams represented them, although he would become the second president of the United States. And so if you don't know that story historically, everybody should go read John Adams' biography. It's a fascinating story.
And not only did he represent them, they got off.
He won the case. But he would also, he was a serious, like he pushed back, like he was part of the revolution, right, that birthed our country. So I really admire John Adams for that. So we look at something like January 6th, and it feels very hypocritical to be a citizen of a country who that's our history and our legacy of existence, and speak to those people who have a legitimate concern. It's not like our government is functioning optimally right now. Let's just be honest.
Right.
I think we're the best country on the face of the planet. I'm a patriot. I would go to war for certain things in my country. Just want to be very clear about that. I would defend this country with weapons. I'm not a pacifist. There are things I'll fight for and protest for. because we have the freedom to do so. And there may be times and seasons in which we might need to take up arms. You know, what side would somebody have been on in the Civil War? That's happened in our history. And so for people to say that our history, there are things we fought for and should fight for, and even country began, with the Boston Tea Party, this armed revolt against King George, to look at an event like that and just simply call it pure evil feels very hypocritical. And I may be wrong, but it just feels like, and there are people doing that as Christians saying this was all pure evil. What about the tarring and feathering of British people at the hands of colonials, that founded our country?
Right.
It feels like a sticky wicket, but maybe it's not as sticky as we make it.
I mean, it is, but it's not our making. I think we dive into the stickiness probably too often. Part of the problem, I think, is trying to make sense of a two-party system that's only agenda is to oppose the other party for its party's favor.
Right.
And so I think that for number one, there's not a Christian party.
Right.
I think that's I feel like that should be obvious, but I don't feel like it is.
Right.
I feel like there's a lot of this. We hear a lot of pastors and a lot of church. I mean, I've seen videos of pastors saying, if you vote Democrat, you're not a Christian. And while I would agree most evangelicals probably lean towards the conservative side, I would argue now that lean went really strong and that wave's coming back more to the middle now, because there's probably more people like me that are I'm just fed up with both sides, because we've seen this increase over the last 20 or 30 years, probably most of my lifetime, where this candidate became president. So in order for us to get our candidate elected president, we need to find someone very polar opposite of that, who's also a very attractive pick, right? And that Obama was that guy after Bush, because there was a lot of upheaval about Bush number two and the war and all that kind of stuff. So let's go with the opposite of him. Yeah. And then after 8 years of Obama, so many people are tired of that. Let's go with Trump. And then we're going to run Hillary Clinton, who not a lot of people liked anyway. And then it just gone. And then it got worse with Biden now. And then I think we're running to that.
I think that's the stuff that J6 people were responding against, is this constant this combating of what they feel are their values, with a system that's not representing them. Right. And I mean that's how Marjorie Taylor Greene gets elected. And by the way, I want to say this, and I may get in trouble for this, but so many things she gets accused of saying, she simply did not say. Yeah. And like her, don't like her, she represents the people who elected her, which is her job.
That's true.
And again, like her or don't like her, she is representing the people who put her in office, and she's trying to be accountable to them.
She's doing her job.
She's doing her job
according to the way it's supposed to be done. I think she's doing it pretty well.
Yeah. And I'll tell you candidly, I did not vote for her. Yeah, I voted for somebody who actually knew, who was running for that position the first time, and when she came back for re-election, I voted for her. Just lay my cards on the table, and partly because, again, once you learned and asked questions, a lot of the stuff people accused her of saying, she did not say. Right. Yeah. And there are Christians, pastors, accusing her of those things, and they're taking it based upon Twitter chatter, never actually asking the question and digging. And then you realize that woman never said that stuff. And she is not the evil brute people have made her out to be. I don't agree with everything she says, absolutely not. But I don't agree with everything Trump says. I don't agree with everything. I don't agree with everything that Ben Sass says, now the president of the University of Florida, and the fact that he's a president of the University of Florida, he's clearly a pagan. No, just kidding. But the senator from Nebraska who loves the Lord, he loves God. I don't agree with everything he says.
Yeah. Yeah,
but,
and I think
so my point in that is people like her getting elected who appear to have an extreme voice because nobody is listening to the Joe in North Floyd County.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you can really see with Marjorie Taylor Greene and her constituency, I think you can really see kind of the two sides of the group that latched themselves on to Donald Trump, which is you've got the hyper conservatives, and then you've got the people who don't really care about politics. They just want a disruptor.
Yeah.
right? They just know it's something smells bad and they want to know what it is. And I think that's why Donald Trump got elected, right? Because they could have latched themselves onto any other conservative who was running for president, but they didn't. They latched themselves onto Trump. Why? Because he's an outsider. But to connect everything then to Epstein, my question is he really an outsider? Because you see
Who is an outsider?
Trump.
Oh,
Because
is he
now,
really
cause
an
now,
outsider?
cause now you
I
see
gotcha.
him palling around with Epstein and everybody who all the other guys are palling around with. And it's like, okay, who's really on the outs here?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Makes you
who's
wonder.
really the bad guy? Because we voted for him because, and to be fair, everything we wanted him to do, he did. He did that. But again, he's a businessman.
Right.
Right? So, of course, he's going to do that.
Right.
So, my question is, okay, we voted for you because you're an outsider. Are you really, or are you just not a politician? Because what I think we're learning in the world today is you can be an insider, your name's just not on the ballot.
It's a fair question. And I think, coming back to J6, because I want to turn to the election cycle here in a moment, I think more damage was done by Antifa riots and Black Lives Matter riots than was done on J6.
Yeah, but those didn't happen at the Capitol.
They didn't happen at the Capitol. True. Right.
Where a new president from a new party was coming in
Right.
and taking over based off of the other one not being happy
Fair point.
about the
Yeah.
results of the election.
Fair
Which
point.
I've always said anyone should be fair to question the legitimacy of an election or of
Right.
anything that where you can't, like, there's no way to have 100% autonomy and trust everything. And there's a lot of question marks. Now, I'm not saying that we should storm the Capitol either.
Right.
And I'm not saying that he said that that's what they
Right.
should do. I think there's also a lot of question marks that he didn't come out boldly and speak against it either. I think that probably, because if we're looking at Trump, the problem with people who support Trump is let me change that, because it's not everybody. I don't want to blanket everybody here.
Sure.
The ones who blindly or just kind of give the savior mentality to Trump would be the more radical side of things. They blindly look at all the stuff all the character issues, all the things that he says and does outside of president stuff. The same is true for the radicals who hate him no matter what, don't care what good was done. They only care the things that he says and does that are not presidential. And the problem is, and this is not even just a Christian thing, is there's no way for those two to ever meet. That's oil and water. And I think that has boiled up over the last several years, maybe really the last 8 years if you count both of the last two presidencies. And the hardest part is it's getting worse. So going back to January 6th, because everything political is driven by media and journalism and things that are also very biased, I just come back to the problem for me as a believer is I can't trust the media ever. I just can't. None of them. I mean, most of them. I can't.
Yeah.
I can't. But I also can't trust accounts of people that were there, because many of the people that were there are politically driven as well. Now, that's not everybody. I want to be very clear that I'm not saying anyone who was there is lying. That's not my saying here. And so it's hard for people and it's hard for believers to really have a strong opinion on something that I can't trust. The information that has been given has not been either A, doctored, B, strongly redacted, or C, just completely made up and spewed out there.
Yeah. The only place that truthfully that you can get a decent amount of information that you can pick through is typically at this point in podcast format, from various sources and even Twitter and other social media feeds where somebody can speak things and it isn't politically motivated, whether it's the far right for Fox or the far left for CNN or somewhere in the middle. You almost have to go to this conglomeration of sources, put it all in a pot, and find the commonality. Mm-hmm. Like, what are the common denominators in these thousands of sources? What are the common denominators? And then you can start picking out the truth. News is a lot harder to sift through today than it ever has been.
Yeah.
And so that's part of our
And there's
challenge.
more of it than there ever has been.
That's right. And as Christians, I think bringing it back, I want to transition, bringing it to this place, we have to exercise discernment. Mm-hmm. And that discernment means, I think each year it gets more complicated. And so the scriptures speak about one of the tribes of Israel, and it said to them, they knew how to interpret the times. They knew how to understand the times. And I think right now more than ever, we need to be a people who understand our times. And that means digging, doing some historical research. I really want to encourage you guys and encourage our listeners, get the book, The Fourth Turning. It is absolutely worth your time to plow through. It's a thick book, and Bob Roberts is having, I don't get an option, I have to read it. So we have a meeting coming up at the end of this month, and I was like, oh no, big book. And then I started reading the book, and I'm absolutely fascinated because it is this historical analysis of cycles and how time advances cyclically. And even linearly and cyclically, I didn't even think about time advancing on a line or in cycles. And so the truth is, if you look carefully, there are cycles to how time and history passes. And sociologies pass through those cycles. And I think we're in one of those. And so as Christians being discerning, we have to look and ask questions like, where are we at historically? What's our past? What's our present? And what does that mean for tomorrow? I mean, for the future. So it means as discerning people, we have to do some work. And it's not just as simple as listening to this podcast or listening to Joe Rogan or listening to Sean Ryan or listening to your favorite preacher. It is an absolute mashup of having the Holy Spirit inform our conscience by knowing the scriptures, being in fellowship, putting the news in front of us, picking out what the truth is, and trying to chart a path forward. And that simply isn't easy.
Right.
So, I mean, if people are looking for us to give you definitive, J6 was from the Lord, no. Or J6 is 100% evil, no. I think it is an absolutely much more complex thing than that.
Yeah.
And
well,
so
it's just like any other event in history.
Right.
I mean, it's something that has positive, it's something that has negatives, and it's something that can be extremely convoluted. I mean, welcome to the study of the world.
Ask my British friends what they think about the American Revolution, and they say, why not trust the providence of God? God had you under a king.
Yeah.
Why not trust the Lord? Why not do Romans 13 and submit to the authority God has placed over you?
Yeah.
Well, don't ask me that question. That's not fair. God bless America.
Don't ask
God.
people in Germany in the late 30s that either.
Yeah.
If you're gonna use that as a or in
right,
Russia.
Thank God we have someone like Dietrich Bonhoeffer who lived under that and then talked about that as a very, I think, providential believer for the time that he was in.
Yeah. What if Mary and Joseph were like, oh, it's providential. Herod said we should kill all the baby boys.
So let's let them die.
I know you said this is your son, but we want to. Sorry, that was
that's true.
It's the same principle.
Well, Esau Macaulay in his book Reading While Black is also a good read. He talks about how how do you balance Romans 9 versus Romans 13? You got Romans 13 that says submit to the authority God has placed over you. God's put the sword in his hand to bless, to punish evil and reward good. And then, but Romans 9 in this chapter that is thick is highlighting the positive example of Moses rebelling against Pharaoh. So you've got in the same book by the same author in this theological treatise on the justification of God, advocating for rebelling and advocating for submitting within a few chapters of each other. Meaning there is a time for discernment when we ought to probably rebel under the guidance of the Lord, and a time we ought to bow the knee under the guidance of the Lord, and that simply requires discernment.
Yeah. And this hits on a point I'm going to make here in a few minutes, so I don't want to dive into it too deeply yet, but it also reminds us the fact that we have to have our citizenship priorities in order too.
Yeah. Right.
Like we've got to, I think too often people are American and then Christian, like we're citizen of America, then citizen of heaven. And if we get that backwards, then that puts our focus on our current authority or our current system, and we're only focusing on that. Whereas opposed to there are those moments where we have to say, well, this authority is not falling under the great authority, the true authority. And in those moments, that's when I have to make a decision.
That's good.
I can't, we can't follow two masters, right? Yeah. And if you try to equate those things, they're not going to line up.
Man, that's a good word. All right, so let's transition to talk about this election cycle. We have a presidential election coming up this November. It's 2024.
God help us.
Yeah, God help us. You said the word a minute ago, conservative, and it's the key word. But I think there's a distinction in the word conservative we need to draw because right now we have I think for the first time in my life, a viable third party option to vote for.
Yes.
And Robert Kennedy.
Yes.
Now here's I want to draw this line. You said the word conservative because it's an important word. I consider myself a conservative, always have. Conservative implies we're seeking to conserve something. Like serve, put these two words together, along with want to serve something. We're going to come along beside it to preserve it. Mm-hmm. So conservative means we're preserving something worth preserving. What I've found is right now, I think this is an important distinction. In most of our camps where we dwell as evangelical Christians, there is the allure to social. No, let me back that up. Practical conservatism, pragmatic conservatism, versus here's a better way to say it: secular conservatism. And I hate that word secular, but dadgummit, I can't help but have to use it. I was trying to avoid it, can't avoid it. Secular conservatism versus, I think, a more robust spiritual conservatism. Because what has allured a lot of us, and I would say me as well, I confess to this, is practical conservatism or secular conservatism just makes a lot of sense. You got your Joe Rogans. And this is where Bill Maher, like, in what world did Bill Maher become a voice of reason for conserving something that matters? He used to be the guy, like, I loved to hate him. Like, I couldn't stand the guy because he was pro killing babies. He was pro everything that we were against as evangelicals. And now all of a sudden, dude's talking about stuff I agree with. And I'm going, so either the spectrum shifted or I've gone backward. And I don't think I've gone backward. I think the spectrum shifted because I think there is a secular conservatism where we find ourselves agreeing with the Joe Rogans and the Bill Mahers. Yeah,
and you don't want to use the word secular conservatism, but I think you have to, because I know people who are very gay, but also far more conservative than I am.
Secular,
which is insane,
right?
But it's true, because you have people now who morally are not on our side of the camp.
Correct.
And this is
pro-abortion,
right? And this is why
right.
I think Christians now. I think this is going to be the most important election for Christians as far as where Christians will line themselves on the left-right side of the map, right, on the D and the R side of the map, right? Because that's the line. And I think for the past 20 years, it's been very much Christians vote for Republicans, right? Christians they vote red, they vote conservative. Why? Because you have conservative liberal parties. But now I think it's very possible, and I think it's most likely for you to be a conservative but also not a Christian.
Yeah.
Those two things are not the same, but also they never were the same. They never should have been the same. It's just Christians latched themselves to the conservative label when conservatism was never about Christianity. Christians latched themselves to conservatism, and that's different. And I think now we're at a point where Christians are going to have to say, you know what? I'm a Christian, period. Yeah. And I think this election is a great, great opportunity for us to do that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned RFK, and just to go ahead and put my cards, I'm voting for him. If he's there, I'm voting for him.
Okay.
Because
you just went all in, man. I mean,
oh yeah. I've thought about it a lot, and I've listened to him. I've listened to him a lot, and I.
So let me, because Chris, you have some great points I want you to bring up. For a person we're in a building that supports everything that exists in this building is to advocate for a pro-life position. Mm-hmm. And people, yeah, dude, we're so robustly pro-life, this building exists for it. Womb to tomb, baby. And that's what this building, so anybody don't give me so yeah. So what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do when we have a president, a former president who did more for the pro-life position, who didn't used to be pro-life, and I'm not even sure he's pro-life now because he's come back and said maybe we did too much for that.
Yeah.
But who actually showed up to a March for Life, was successful at getting across the finish line the reversing of Roe v. Wade, but at the same time has shifted his position again versus a side that is completely pro-choice, 100% pro-choice, and a third-party candidate who's like, I don't want to kill babies and I don't want mamas to get pregnant who don't need to get pregnant, which would be RFK.
And that is the most sensible position.
It is a sensible. So Chris, what are we supposed to do this election cycle as Christians? And the hard question, what do we do, man?
So move to Switzerland.
That's a pretty good option.
Sorry, that's what all the liberals said they were going to do.
They did.
If Trump got elected, and I think they're also here.
They imagine.
So I got 5 points. I'm just going to go through the points because I think it's easier to say it that way, and then love to hear your thoughts on some of these. And they're a little bit different than my takeaways at the end. So number one, I think some of these are just good reminders. Number one, there's not going to be a bunch of candidates with high character and integrity who are trying to make things better for Christians. I think it's not to say that the things they stand for won't benefit Christians, but we've got to stop thinking that these candidates are very strategically trying to make things better for Christians. So I want to get that out of the way first because I think there's some confusion there. No matter who the GOP candidate is, his or her primary interest is not Christians.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned the word label a while ago. And I think that was a key thing to say because I think that's what they've become is labels. But those labels shift in definition.
Yeah.
So their primary interest is not Christians, and honestly, their primary interest is not really even the American public, because the parties exist for what's best for the party. I mean,
Right.
I think that we could probably all agree with that. Doesn't mean that there's not some things that will benefit the American public, right? Like the rise in gas prices did not benefit me, nor did the groceries costing $1,000 for a couple of apples, and so. But I see those things argued a lot. And so I want to make that, I think that's an important first point is we've got to stop thinking these people exist just because they appeal to Christians doesn't mean that their interest is to put forth policies that are going to benefit Christians. Number two, I think it's important to focus less on the lack of good candidates and the absolute joke of having a two-party system. If you guys can't tell, I abhor that. I don't really like politics anyway, so that's probably why I feel free to just talk about this because I don't. It's not that I don't read or keep up with it. I just don't enjoy that topic oftentimes. So focus less on that and focus on what issues matter most. Right. I said earlier there are things to stand on the hill and fight and die for, and then there are things not to, and that's as Americans, as people, but also as Christians, right? Things like sanctity of life, I think that's worth standing on the hill and dying for. I will fight for that because I think that is non-negotiable. That is 100%. Biblical. There's also things like freedom of worship that are at hand. Things that involve education, the economy. Like there are some topics that are more important than others, but look more at that. And I think we focus too much on the candidate and not on the policies and what things are going to be implemented. And so do your research, well-rounded research from credible sources that are not named CNN or MSNBC or Fox News and some of those, or people you follow on Twitter. Because believe it or not, people lie on Twitter.
People do lie on Twitter.
Or X, whatever. So number three, don't get into social media feuds and lose sight of who you are in Christ and who you represent. So again, I'm not telling you not to stand on your ground or never discuss it, but remember it's most often not a situation where you're going to change people's minds. So enter debates and discussions with grace and humility and do not be overcome with anger and start pulling people down and hurting your witness. And I think this is the area that Christians have really struggled with because I think they're a lot of times good intention. I'm standing up for what I believe that turns quickly into demeaning other people and tearing them down. And I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of sarcastic comments and things, and I have to check myself as well. Because it's easy, just like when you're talking sports, right? And all of us love sports, and you debate sport. All of a sudden, you're making fun of someone and calling them names, and because they have a different belief than you do, or they like a team that you don't like, And unless you root for Florida Gators, like the rest of that is is not really that important.
That's right.
That's a little bit different than those 2 points, but I think it's important to put out there because I think that's something we are guilty of as a group of believers that we've got to stop that. No matter what you believe, we've got to stop attacking others and being part of that group that's seeking to disunify.
That's good.
Number 4, and this is the one I hit on a little while ago, I said to come back to. Don't bend scripture to appease political arguments or fit culture or the political landscape. And then don't use it to justify a candidate or a political party either, because I see that a lot. But instead, we can hold leaders and candidates accountable with the Bible and to be salt and light. Romans 12:2 is a good reminder. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. That by testing, you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. I think we can take that as when we don't conform to the world and we don't try to make Scripture fit into what's happening in culture, but instead we are transformed by that renewal. Then we actually can test and discern what His will is. I think that's when we find clarity, and He speaks to us and He gives us. So before we start going and voting or promoting one candidate or trashing another candidate, don't take Scriptures out and try to fit them in and say, I'm going to vote for this guy because the Bible says so. And instead say, what is this person representing, and how does that line up with my vision, and what, or not my vision, but what the Lord is saying, and what's truth in His Word. And then finally, no matter what happens, you and I will be okay. We haven't had a good president in a long time, probably. I mean, like a good person and a good president. Maybe we should put it that way. There's been good things done. There's been bad things done, probably by everybody. And we're still here, right? But the more important part is God is still sovereign and in control, and Jesus wins. Nothing's happening outside of His authority and rule over the earth. Let me clarify this, because I'm sure we'll get questions. That's not to say politics aren't important or the elections don't have repercussions. It's not to say don't vote or take it seriously. We should do those things. That's where we're still an American. We still have a say-so in there. But we can't lose sight of what's most important, because, again, we know one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. And He will come back to bring those who are in Him to live eternally with Him. So no matter who sits in the White House, we're going to be okay. Yeah. Doesn't mean that things won't get worse or they might get better. Yeah. But in the end, there have been some changes, but we're still living, right? We're still here.
That's good.
And so that's my takeaways. Are more like, how do we respond to those things that we talked about? But those were, and that kind of fits in there. But I don't know. What do you guys think on that? Like, what are some things that are happening between now and November? Like, how can we as Christians be a change agent for good in that election cycle? Yeah. Because it's easy to say we should vote for him or we should vote. That's not what we're discussing. Our goal today is not to say who you should vote for, but who you do vote for. How are you justifying that, either to others, to yourself, and to the Lord, and how are you making those decisions as a Christian?
I think it's a multitude of factors, and it's one of those components where it's not one thing. It's a multitude of things. I think part of that is there are a lot of issues in play for us that are vital to the preservation of an economic freedom and a real freedom, practically speaking. The middle class has disappeared, and that's because of fiscal financial policy. Truthfully, that my favorite president in my lifetime would be George W. Bush. I loved W, and I know people don't like him. Fiscally, I think he made a lot of mistakes. Practically, I think he was a good leader for what he got presented. I think he led us well. Fiscally, I think he continued a policy and fed a policy that has continued to been fed today that has obliterated the middle class. And so what that does is pit really, really low income versus really, really high income together, and that's a recipe for sociological disaster. That's where wars happen. And so I think there are some things in play that if that doesn't get fixed, all of our pro-life work is going to continue to struggle, because if you don't have a middle class where people have a pathway out of poverty, we're going to see the increase of things that are facilitating the growth of the need for a robust pro-life movement. Mm-hmm. So we've got to vote for some policies that are going to make it possible for us to fight successfully for pro-life, if that makes sense. And I'm being very vague because we can really get down a rabbit hole here. Yeah. And so we've got to think in what decision is going to make sociological financial sense that actually creates a middle class, which provides a ladder of growth for people who find themselves in poverty. And right now that is shrinking. And I don't care what anybody says, it's not a tighten your bootstraps issue. there are legitimate challenges to climbing into the middle class when the middle class doesn't exist financially right now. And so that's a reality. The middle class is shrinking. Two, I think you have to, what does the Bible value in character? And this is a struggle. This is the difference between secular conservatism versus a conservatism that's rooted in the Bible. Yep. Is I think character matters. And sometimes, man, you try to sniff that and like, man, can I live with that smell for 4 years versus I got to live with my conscience. And you got to say, what is my conscience saying here? And there have been times I confess I've violated my conscience for the sake of a very secular, pragmatic conservatism. Throw up my hands and confess it. And at the same time, then I regretted that decision. Not that it played out poorly, but my conscience was bothered. And I think as a Christian, we have to, the Bible's pretty clear, Romans 14, we have a clear conscience that we can obey and trust that that conscience is informed by Scripture, by the Holy Spirit, and by fellowship. And so obey your conscience. And then don't be ignorant, man. Know what's in play. You know, and know what's in play. And then finally, I would say local elections, state and local elections are probably, and Gabe, don't give us your opinion about the presidency. We have to rein you in here. I cannot emphasize how important state and local elections are more important than the president than electing a president of the United States. San Francisco is a prime example of that. The state of California and the city of San Francisco are prime examples of if you get a governor wrong and you get local city councils wrong, you can wreck a state in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. Florida and Georgia are two examples. People are moving here because of two governors who did a bang-up job through COVID, didn't swallow the lie, kept economic prosperity in play, and people who voted for policies that wrecked their state are moving to our state, and my fear is they're going to start voting for the same dumb policies and wreck our state. I was being honest. I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid Atlanta and Savannah.
Our last governor race, I was worried about that.
Right.
Because that would have been completely different.
Completely different. That's exactly right. And so your city council, your county commission, your local representatives, your state representatives, and your governor are probably a more vital vote than President of the United States. So don't overlook that for the flash of the presidential election. Mm-hmm. It's important, but your governor and your city council and your if you have a city and county government like we do, we have two different governments. Those elections are more vital than President of the United States. So don't overlook those because we have terrible turnout in Floyd County and Rome City when voting for those things. Like the turnout is sick. It's gross. Yeah. And we've got to do better because those really matter. And so if you can't tell, I'm kind of passionate about that and may one day find myself running for one of those positions. And so vote for me if I do that. But it matters to me. And so because like you don't appreciate politics, I think the management of a city is one of the things God has given Christians as one of the ways we are to manage all of creation. And I'm not saying you don't. I know you care about it. I think
the better phrase is I'm exhausted by by how it comes at me. Like I'm exhausted with like the political commercials and the conversations and what it turns people into. That maybe 100%. I should clarify that. Yeah. I totally understand the importance of it, especially locally. Yeah. But I'm just just worn down by the constant berating and battles and those kind of things.
Because it's always gross. It's just constantly gross.
I would almost vote for someone that says, hey, best of luck to my opponent. Yeah. I'm not going to do any commercials that, Well, Gabe, let me ask you a question while you're here. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, you're good.
Because I'm curious because there's a generational gap here between you and us. So and I would imagine voting and election cycles really represent that because I would have voted and looked at things differently at 19, 20, 21 in that range that I do now at 41, right? I'll be 42 when the actual election takes place. Because honestly, right now, I'm like, hey, if somebody will bring the prices back down and the home interest rates down and then abolish daylight saving time, I will vote for them. I don't care if they use the F word every time. It's it's a little facetious, but there's a little truth in there too. Because I'm tired of getting like 18 groceries for $120. So, but also I'm at a point where I'm I've got a family and I've got a child stuff. So, from your perspective, being a college student, what are you kind of seeing are some of those maybe hot button issues or what's being talked about more? If you, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but like, what are you looking at and what are you hearing from your peers?
I mean, my friends, I've been very blessed by the Lord to have some very, very intelligent friends, and they all track with this. But I think my friends though that probably don't pay much attention to the more delicate minutia of stuff like this. I think what they look for overwhelmingly really is just what issues affect their daily lives, right? Because they're concerned with rent, tuition, the eventual student debt that they're going to have to take care of, and then food, right? Like, how can I just survive college? Because right now, their concerns have been molded to, I can't function in this world without a degree, and unless I'm wired to, like go to trade school, but that's not everybody. So if you're not wired for trade school, then you're hamstrung into this situation where you now have to, if you don't play your cards right, you have to go into a unhealthy amount of debt. And while you're going into an unhealthy amount of debt, you have to find a way to just literally survive 4 years.
Right.
And so they're just concerned with, can gas go down? Can food go down? And maybe will my debt go away? And honestly, that's why a lot of college students voted for Biden, is because he campaigned on that. But that also, though, is the very fact that Biden campaigned on that and Trump campaigned on issues like abortion is something that really gets at the heart of why I'm voting for who I'm voting for, which is, and why my friends are voting who they're voting for, which is, I don't want a candidate that campaigns on what they think will get them elected. And they might follow through with that. Great. Trump appointed conservative justices. Fantastic. You said you would do that. You're a man of your word. That's good. However, is that the real problem? Like, I want to know who's talking about, and the people who are my age, who are tuned into this stuff, are very much of the same mind, which is, I want to see who's talking, who doesn't really care about what they think I want to hear. They're talking about what they think I need to hear. And that's someone like RFK, who's talking about things like the fact that the middle class is disappearing. Nobody's talking about that except for him. Why? Because it's a legitimate problem. He sees it and he's running on it. Yeah. Right? He's not campaigning on what he thinks will get him elected.
Right. I call that the trigger list. Like, I'm going to campaign on the things that trigger an emotional response to get people to follow that.
And that, I think, also gets at the problem with the way the presidency has functioned recently, which is I will campaign on whatever will get me votes. Mm-hmm. I don't really care about these issues. I might do them, I might not. And that's that is the only thing that I think elevates Trump over Biden and Obama recently, simply because he did what he said he would. That's the only difference, because you have candidates who are campaigning on what they think will get them elected. They got elected. Forget what those things are, what side of the aisle they represent. Just look at what they are. They're people who may or may not actually hold those values, campaigning on things that will just get them in the office. And now the question is, did they do those things? Trump did. Great. Again, he's a businessman. I want someone who addresses the actual problems that they see, right? Not what they think I see. What they see are actual problems.
Integrity. Like they're actually willing to say, we're probably going to disagree on some of these issues, but we can all agree that this is a national problem and we can fix this together if we will ratchet down the rhetoric. I mean, it's one of the things I like about RFK. He's like, I have to respect people who disagree with me, and they need to be part of the solution with me. And he's speaking a language of being kind to one another, and he has not torn anybody down. No. I respect that about the man, and so I'm massively intrigued by him. I'll tell you what's going to be interesting. I don't believe Biden will make it to re-election. He's going to get replaced at the convention. I'm 100% convinced. I don't think the man's coherent. I'm honest to God.
He can't talk, so I don't know how you get.
And so I think what's going to be interesting is what happens with Trump and being kept off the ballot. Can DeSantis rally? What will Vivek Ramaswamy, like this guy is soaring because he's articulate and he has ideas and he's not afraid to just call out reporters. Like I love watching him answer questions. He is entertaining.
Right.
But then Tulsi Gabbard's going to have a role. I mean, the speculation is with RFK that he's going to have some announcement in Hawaii, which is Tulsi Gabbard's. So if he pulls Tulsi Gabbard in as his running mate, or even Vivek Ramaswamy as a Republican, dude's probably going to run away with the election.
Yeah.
And so what's going to be interesting over the coming months is to see what happens. Can RFK pull in enough? Because the DNC, this is blowing my mind. This is the first time, at least I think in American history, somebody can correct me, that a viable presidential candidate has been, his request for Secret Service protection has been rejected. And of all the people who need Secret Service protection, it should be RFK.
Because he literally has a history of them coming after his family.
Got his uncle, got his dad.
And they won't protect him now?
They won't protect
Come
him.
on.
And so that tells me, why won't you protect him? So RFK he's unique. He's pulling in both sides because the DNC wouldn't even give him. He's a Democrat. Says he's a Democrat. The DNC won't give him time of day because he's not marching on the far left progressive agenda. Is DeSantis going to be the Republican vote? Which truthfully, I think I just speak my opinion here. I think DeSantis is the smart choice because I think Trump is so polarizing, and I think he was a good president. I actually think he did a good job. I think he did a good job in a lot of things. I think if he'd kept his mouth shut, and he would have probably gotten himself reelected, but he couldn't keep his mouth shut. And nonetheless, DeSantis is probably a smart choice there. I don't know. Right now there's so much unsettled. Truthfully, the only sure one out there right now seems to be RFK because he is clear about, I see this as a problem. I'm not telling you what you want me to say. I'm telling you what I see and he's a well-read, well-studied man. So I respect the man. And so he's fascinating. We probably need to wrap this up. So Chris, it's time for some Hayes takeaways.
It is. Let me,
rebuke us for any foolishness we've spoken.
I'm not going to do that. I did want to respond to Gabe's answer to my question because I think that's fascinating. When I was your age, when I was around that college age, like we didn't care about things like affording rent or groceries because not because we didn't have to buy them, but it just wasn't a concern. Mm-hmm. So like what I was voting for was way different than like my parents or people that were 20 years older than me. Yeah. We voted on things that we were passionate about, right? Mm. And I find it interesting that now that has changed because of so much damage has been done through the economy, through a lot of those things. It's almost like, there's still plenty of people voting on what they're passionate about. Don't get me wrong, but
college students almost can't afford to vote on what they're passionate about.
Right?
Can't.
Yeah,
they'd love to, but they just like, if I don't vote for someone who might help me out financially, I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like they can't afford to vote who they want to vote for.
Right. And you combine that with all the people who are, I had every vote I've made in the last several elections has been more of a less of two evils kind of situation than it is like, man, I'm really proud of who I voted for. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sad.
It is.
It is. So let me jump into my takeaways. I know we could talk about that forever, but so my takeaways for today are how we as Christians should respond to the political climate, the election cycle, and things related to that. So number one, pray. I feel like that's always a Hayes takeaway, but we got to keep doing it, right? We need to pray for our leaders. We need to pray for not only the ones that we support, but the ones we don't. We need to pray for our country. I think it's okay to pray for the country. Pray that the Lord is glorified throughout all of this, though. And in spite of division, sin, greed, lies, and so many bad things that are happening, pray that the name of Jesus would be made famous throughout. Pray for patience and humility for yourself. Pray for guidance and direction. And again, just pray. Number two, and I hit on this earlier, but don't quarrel or engage in fights, whether it be in person or online. Number one, it's not worth it, right? And I said it already, but it was so important I needed to take it to add it to the takeaways today. Politics tends to bring out the worst in people, and I think that's part of why I'm exhausted by it, just to be honest with you. And I think Christians are often just as bad, if not worse, in the public square when it comes to political topics, polarizing elections, et cetera. So just be quick to listen, slow to speak, honor someone else's opinion, even if it's very different from yours, and make sure that if you're giving one, and if you're giving it strongly, back it up with Scripture. So read the Word and don't vary from it. speak with kindness, seek to lift others up. And if you can't, then don't speak. That's just kind of like that. Your parents used to give you that. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Maybe we should get back to more of that at times, right?
Yeah.
And then number 3, lastly, while our country is in the midst of great uncertainty, again, just remember as a believer, you live with the assurance and hope of a king bringing his work to completion and building his kingdom for his glory and our good. And don't just shrug that off as like some church talk. And that's easy to say, well, that's just a Christian thing to say, but we're commanded to live our lives in that manner. Hebrews 11:1-3 is a good reminder. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. And again, he's in control, and we can trust in that. We can trust even if our candidate isn't elected, that the Lord is using that and working all that together for our good, but most importantly for his glory.
That's awesome. Good stuff, man. Well, this is an enlightening discussion. It's a lot of fun to talk about this stuff. I enjoyed it. Gabe, thanks for your input. It's good to have you in here, man. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances.
Yeah, it's all good.
Praise the Lord for insurance. It's awesome. Chris, well done. It's a pleasure to do this with you guys. Gosh, 2023 is over. This is first podcast of 2024. Look forward to a lot of good time with you guys. Please feel free. Send us an email, theologyanddirt@gmail.com. Ask us questions. We'd love to get questions. And at some point, we actually want to do a mailbag. So you send us enough questions, we're going to take questions and we're just going to hit them. And we won't prepare. We'll just take the questions and get after it, man, and just discuss it. It's a lot of fun to do that. So send us those questions, theologyanddirt@gmail.com. If you have a comment or any feedback, you can send it to that same email address. Don't forget to check out Magic Mind. Absolutely awesome stuff. You can go to the blog, theologyanddirt.com, check out sermon notes, all that good stuff. Leave us a comment. Leave us a 5-star rating. Share the podcast. God's been gracious to allow us to grow a little bit and enjoy a little bit of success with the podcast. And we hope that by his grace and for his good purposes, we can think through some things Christianly and as people just live in the public square and give you something to think about and help you along the journey. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it very much. Have a good one. We'll see you next time. Out.
My soul feels like a trumpet on the battlefield. Don't shower me with flattery.